Hello and welcome to everybody. I am just going to share my screen through this session. But thank you everybody for joining on time and signing up for this session. I'm representing Ooloi Labs today. I'm one of the co-founders and partners at Ooloi. And with me, as Ganesh said, there's Akshay. There's Akshay, who's also a co-founder and partner. There's also Sachita, who is a strategy and partnership associate and also a design researcher. And we have Suchi, who has the experience of instructional design as well as facilitation. So we'll all be taking in questions as the session proceeds, but feel free to keep using the chat. I think through the session, there are places where we'll be opening it out to you all. But in case there are questions other than those times, please use the chat to share your questions. I'll just very quickly talk about what we do at Ooloi Labs. We work with social impact organizations and communities to help them through their journey of creating impact by focusing on voices on the ground. Very specifically, we'll go in the depth of what we do through the session, actually. But just before we start, I just wanted to set the intent of the session to share. I mean, this is just an attempt to share our knowledge in making storytelling collective organizational behavior. And we've noticed that it has often been interpreted as an individual skill. So how can we, our work has been to really use this skill and this technique to make it into a collective organizational behavior. So just basically sharing some of these learnings with you all. This session is also for us to start. We thank you to everybody who actually written questions when the registration form was shared. We have gone through those. I don't think we can answer all of it in this session, but definitely this would attempt us to start a few conversations that may help us answer some of those questions or maybe get those answers together. So if you're all up to it, we wanted to start with telling you a story and sharing one of the stories that we have very recently heard from a story written by a field team member at FMCH. FMCH is an organization, foundation for mother and child health. They work in the maternal health and malnutrition space and working with vulnerable communities to especially empowering families, mothers, children with the knowledge and services which are needed to improve behavior and nutrition food choices. To read out the story, I would request Akshay to please read this out for us, the story written by one of the field team members at FMCH.
Thanks, Yashna. Background of who this story is about. Yasmin Khan is a housewife living in Ajmer Nagar, Bhiwandi. She completed her secondary schooling. She lives with her in-laws. In total, they have 8 family members in her family, and they belong to a middle-class family. She follows all the hygiene practices in her house. All the family-related decisions were taken by her mother-in-law, including grocery shopping. Initially, Yasmin was quiet during the home visit. She felt hesitant to express her feelings and thoughts. In contrast to this, her mother-in-law was aggressive and strict about her daily household practices. Issues and events. Yasmin registered with us as pregnant mother in her second trimester of her pregnancy. After checking her ANC card, the field officer identified her as a high-risk mother, as she had low hemoglobin levels, 9 mg. Mother was experiencing morning sickness and frequent episodes of vomiting. Due to low diet diversity and vomiting, the mother weighed only 48 kgs. FMCH field officer, during her first home visit, tried to identify what challenges she is facing. During her first visit, she reported that she was not consuming frequent meals as her mother-in-law didn't allow her to eat food. Mother-in-law always used to say that तुमने अकेले नहीं बच्चे पैदा किए हैं, इतने खाने की जरूरत नहीं है. Efo got to know that her mother-in-law didn't allow her to eat what she wanted to eat. In the next visit, Yasmin's mother-in-law was present at the home. Field officers started counseling and tried to engage mother-in-law in the conversation about diet diversity for Yasmin. When the field officer started taking 24 hours dietary recall, mother-in-law got furious on the field officer. She started scolding the field officer, saying that, "आपको क्या लगता है, हम इसे खाना नहीं देते? आप किस लिए हमारी पूछताछ कर रहे हो?" She asked field officer to leave the home immediately. The field officer tried to convince her, but she didn't listen to anything. Our field officer didn't stop there. She continuously tried to visit her mother-in-law and just tried to build a good rapport. After some time, the field officer again went for a home visit. Now, during this visit, the mother-in-law was listening to the counseling quietly and started asking cross questions to our field officer like, क्या हम फल फ्रूट दे सकते हैं उसको? अगर हम नहीं देंगे तो क्या नुकसान होने वाला है? Field officer confidently answered all her questions by appreciating that she is concerned about Yasmin's health. This made the mother-in-law happy, and finally, the field officer successfully built a rapport with Yasmin's mother-in-law. Mother-in-law expressed that during her pregnancy, her mother-in-law didn't allow her to eat different foods. This made the mother-in-law behave in such a way with Yasmin. Field officer counseled Yasmin about ways to improve diet diversity, how she can address morning sickness, and IFA tablet consumption importance. The mother-in-law was part of every counseling session of Yasmin. The field officer motivated Yasmin and her mother-in-law to join the pregnancy club as it will be beneficial for her. She attended all the sessions very attentively and participated in all activities. This club helped her to open up and gave the confidence to talk in front of a group of people. Mother-in-law helped Yasmin to follow all the counseling and PC session practices. She started incorporating different food groups in her diet to improve diet diversity. The current situation and learning. Now, Yasmin is in her last trimester of her pregnancy and her weight is 60 kilos and hemoglobin levels are 12 mg. Family members were very thankful and happy to see the change in Yasmin's health status. Mother-in-law takes part in nutrition course sessions, and also she is an active participant of support groups in Ajmer Nagar area. From this story, we learned that people behave and their beliefs are according to their past experiences. We should always be patient with these people and try to find the reason behind their actions. Nothing is impossible, but patience and communication skills can help us to achieve our goals by building rapport and trust with family members.
Thanks, Akshay, for that. I would like to open it out to you all in terms of just a few questions. What did you hear? What parts of it stayed with you? What makes it a story? And what did you learn from it? If any of you would want to unmute, if you want to share something in chat, please feel free to share in anything, whatever you felt while reading this story from a field team member, a story of a field officer, and Yasmin. Yasmin is not the real name of the person. We had to change that for the purpose of this presentation, but yes, the story of a field officer and Yasmin. Any of you would want to share? You can always unmute. Yes. Hi.
Hi. Should I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Hi. Thanks so much for the story. And actually, I'm Mariam Faruqi from iPro Bono, currently based in London. And the first thing I thought from the story was it just taking the name of the person, telling a personal story from the perspective of one of the people that the work is actually impacting. That immediately caught my attention, and then I just listened. And I think it's something that we're also trying to do better. So taking just literally by taking the name Yasmin Khan, I was like, okay, fine. just started listening and setting the context. And then the way that the story was built up through to the end, where you had that sort of positive change at the end, I thought that was effective. And ultimately, I think we're all striving to do that with the stories that we're trying to tell. So thanks for that.
Super. Thank you so much for sharing that. Anybody else wants to go?
Hello.
Yes.
Yes. Hi, myself is Rashmita from UCL. So actually, I can connect with this story because it's quite similar to our objectives. Because like the attitude, behavior, we're working with the young boys and our relations period. So we are adding with the key message that we have to be patient. The communication play a great role whenever we are like whatever the issues we are talking, no matter it's anemia, no matter it's malnutrition or gender equality, anything. I mean, belonging from this field, we have to be patient with them, irrespective beyond their social economic status, their knowledge, and somewhere, yeah, we have to come in the same platform to address this kind of situations. And I'm really looking forward for these sessions because it's a good start to it's kind of a brainstorming, to analyzing your thought process and getting to know each other. So yes, this is a good one to start. Thank you.
Super. Thank you so much for sharing that. There are a couple of points in the chat as well. Just going to read those out very quickly. The chronology was what hit me, the narration of the challenges to transformation is simplified and smooth. Yes, somebody else has raised their hand. Vaishali.
Yeah. Hi. So I could actually felt more relatable to the story and was also being able to pay attention to it because all the incidents or the details of the story were put together. Also, I didn't feel that the story is incomplete. I could feel the sense of completeness after listening to the story. So yeah, that.
Thank you. Just keeping the time constraint in mind, I would just move to the second part of this interaction. If some of you, I mean, you can always please keep sharing your thoughts on the story, but just wanted to also pose another set of questions for you all. In terms of what is, if you can just open this out right now, what is storytelling for you? How can you use stories for work? I think we did hear a couple of answers, but if you have to, if you know what and how can you use stories for work, what are the challenges you expect to face in doing that? Again, opening out to everybody, you can always add to the chat or unmute, raise hands. We're not that big a group, so we can manage raising hands and talking as well. Okay, I can see a couple of more comments on the story. Okay, Paraj says stories can be used to bring out the intangible changes. That's quite interesting and right, Paraj. Anybody else, or Paraj, would you want to elaborate a little on that?
Yes, I mean, in terms of nonprofits, like when we set up the outcomes and we communicate about it, outcomes and all the targets, there are a lot of things like change in behaviors and something that cannot be counted or that cannot be, the stories help out in bringing all these things, like how small changes are affecting or impacting the bigger changes, helping us to reach the outcomes. So change in mindset, behavioral changes, all these things, stories help out to bring.
Great. Yeah. I think stories can definitely highlight those behavior changes and that nuance which happens on the field. Storytelling for me, I'm just going to read out the comment which has just come. Storytelling for me is more than just characters. It's about finding a voice, taking the reader on a journey, and something that evokes a certain emotion or change in perspective. Thanks for sharing that, Srikar. Storytelling is a hook to grab attention for sure. The narrative of the story should be such that it intrigues audience to read it till the end. Building connect and relevance is storytelling for me. Why should I, you, anyone care about it? That's very, very well put. Thank you to all those who've added inputs in chat. Anybody wants to share a little more, you can always unmute also. We'd be happy to hear your thoughts beyond this. Any challenges, if you think you expect to face while using storytelling for work or stories in general as you've defined them? Yes.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I'm Monita.
Hi, Anita.
I have joined from my organization's.
Yeah, I figured that. Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't want to say stay trees, please stay.
I mean, that's why it is say trees. Okay, I'm not a tree, but okay. All right. So, for the biggest challenge for us as an organization and being in climate communication space, I think is, I mean, I don't want to sound insensitive, but when I'm also an enthusiast when it comes to being there for animals who can't speak your language. But I've seen when you want to tell a story of an animal, it is better said than telling a story of a tree, because it is so hard to build that personification or that connection with a tree. I mean, a car can rampage a tree and it will be dying on the street, which is very different from a stray dog dying on the street. And I don't want to sound insensitive. I'm just trying to build a visual.
Yeah.
And it is very hard for a storyteller to make sure that the people feel the same emotions as they feel for a living thing, because tree is also one. But it is very hard for a climate space to tell all of that, to personify trees and water and earth in that space. And I think that is why it is largely a third world problem. So I feel when we make stories, it is majorly a third world problem. And someone like Yasmin is very much like, you can connect with it. You know that you have seen a friend, or probably it's you only who have been there before marriage, after marriage. So it's very relevant. But what about planet? I mean, that's the harder part. And because I am talking from an organization where we do that, I think it is even more harder for us to build that connect.
For sure. Thanks for sharing that. I think what you've also put is one of the very important things of how do you really make people understand the context really well to be able to relate to the topic of the story. I mean, the topic can be anything. The topic could be the person also. The topic could be a place. It could be, as you said, it's about a tree. It's about anything related to climate. There is not an instant connect at times for people who don't necessarily know. And I think what I'm hearing is, how do you really give that context and understanding, if I'm not wrong, Neeta?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Sahana has put some of the challenges are consent, real or fiction names, which was in the registration form. Sure. I think I also shared that the story that we shared was a fictional name, but maybe let's cover some of these in the next part of the presentation, I think, which you've put as challenges, also overcoming challenges and empowering field team members to share their successes and failures. I think that's also a good start for us to be able to move forward to the next section, which is essentially our approach to storytelling and what has been the way we understand storytelling, and how can we basically use this as an approach. I am going to just close the chat in case there's something. Please, I'd request Akshay, Sachita, Suchi to respond. Okay, so one of the major things about our approach towards storytelling has been to be able to enable different kinds of voices. And I think that has been one of the biggest points and factors for us to be able to use storytelling. So the training, the story that you read of a field team member was also enabling a field team member through a training process, which we recently, which we are in progress with FMCH, which has and the focus for us has been that how do you use storytelling as an approach to capture field team knowledge from field team members, grassroots workers, community workers, their experiences, their insights, and knowledge, and as I said, knowledge before. So that has definitely been the focus for us. The second point has been more on stories are make any impact more relatable and meaningful. As you all also shared, that there is a connection that gets established. And while data is usually captured, while data is always there, but stories, the real examples, the real experiences enable us to make those connections with different stakeholders. And that really is something which drives us to use this as an approach to do the work that we're doing. But more essentially, the point that we made in the beginning, which was that for us, storytelling is an organizational behavior. It's like a collective action that we need to take rather than the individual skill, because often storytelling is used like this complex skill for people to have and for only a few people to have in an organization. And maybe a couple of them are also trained to be able to tell good stories. But it is essentially a need for the organization as a whole to build a culture around sharing stories. We all have so many examples. The work we do, everything is in stories, and the best part is that we think in stories. We and that holds for everybody. Everything, if you think that, oh, hey, this is an experience that happened yesterday, and we try and narrate that experience, we do think in stories, and it just becomes, as soon as you look at storytelling from that lens, it becomes easy to accept, and it becomes easy to share in that way. So these are a couple of points. I would for the next part, I would like to invite to share about power and importance of stories in the organization. I'd like to invite Shruti, who is the co-founder and CEO at FMCH. As I shared, what FMCH works in the space of maternal health and malnutrition. Shruti is here. Yes, hi Shruti. I think if I can just start with, if you can just share the importance of storytelling and FMCH's journey in a way to look at storytelling, I think that'll be great.
Sure. Thanks, Yashna. Hi everyone. Thanks for coming for this session, and Yashna, thanks for having me. So our journey with storytelling is it's been a very love-hate sort of a relationship, and I think when we started really loving stories, that's when we met Ooloi. So we initially work, because we work in the space of malnutrition. Things can be fairly black and white, right? Like a child is either malnourished or not. And it's very easy to say, I gave these inputs and the child came out of malnutrition. But what we also realized was, and we all knew this very intuitively, and we were getting stories about it, but we didn't know how to sort of capture it, right? So the other big piece that we were also influencing was gender, which was we were actually building agency in mothers. We were building agency in families. We also realized that fathers started taking care. So they performed a lot more of caregiving roles because of the work that we did. But the only outcome that we measured was malnutrition. Everything else was just stories, and we really didn't know how to communicate this, right? And I think that's when we started thinking, there is so much more that we are missing out on, because we are not we're not looking at stories as data points. We're just looking at numbers as data points. And once we had that sort of a shift, I think we've really started looking at stories a lot more closely. And of course, it started with like a couple of us coming together and saying, we get so many stories every single day. Each of our beneficiaries goes through a process. And each of the families that we go through, sorry, I don't mean to use the word beneficiaries. Each of the families that we go through a process. But we really are not sort of getting the essence of this process. It's also very important for our work that we do this, because if we were to scale this, what are the real learnings? Why is it that some things are working? Are there other social determinants that are present that we are not really focusing on? All of this will only come through stories, right? And so once we sort of realize this, the next most obvious question was, okay, now how do we collect these stories? How do we organize them? How do we read these stories? How do we find patterns? And over the last couple of months, we've been working with Ooloi to help figure out this whole thing of like, okay, what does stories do for an organization? And how do we build this muscle of better storytelling at every level, right? Like, and I think something that one of my teammates is, now, we don't have to be all writers, right? But we should be able to identify a story, be able to get the insight from it so that it can be used for our programs, it can be used for communication and everything else. And not just success stories, also failure stories, right? Because the failure stories actually tell us a lot more than the successes. So I'm just going to pause here.
Yeah, I think I'd also request anybody to, if you all have any questions from Shruti, please feel free to ask in chat. But in the meantime, Shruti, if you can also share the experience of the field officers and program associates who are on the field, and your focus was always training them, right? Training them to share their stories. But what has your experience been in capturing or making them share stories? What are your learnings been? Or what are your challenges also? I think separating that out would be really useful.
I think definitely one of the challenges, and I'll be very open over here. I think earlier, like before we had this whole realization that stories can be used as data points, the only reason that we collected stories was for donor reports. Like, and be very honest with you, it was like donor ne manga hai 3 stories do successes ka with pictures, to unka 3 ka consent liya, bhej diya. The point was like, how do you shift that mindset in the team? Because then you're now suddenly saying, no, look at insights of those stories, right? And then now, and the biggest thing is, as a team, now you start trusting everybody, right? Trust that everybody can see the story. It's just a skill that needs to be built, which also means everybody needs to be completely aligned on your theory of change. It's a learning organization that you're then building. And that takes a whole culture shift. And I'm not saying we've like done it. It's every day is a new learning process. When we started off, I think Yashna will have this story of FMCH itself can be something. So when we first started off with Yashna, the first 3 times that we did the story, we only got success stories. We only got like, there was a child who was not well, we did this, and the child improved. And we're like, wait, there's something fundamentally wrong about this. Then we went back and we realized it's because we've always used it for donor reports. And we always show like, this has been a success in the donor, to the donor. We never really share failures, right? So then the whole thing was, okay, now how do you create a safe space within the organization where, everybody in the team can come and say, guys, this worked, but there are 3 things that are in the program that is currently not working. These are things that we are not addressing. And it's a very liberating process, very honestly, because then you suddenly are, you're also able to put boundary conditions to, this is where my program works best. So in that sense, it's been, I
think, and we did see a transformation that, we can share this feedback because this is not working and we really need to work. I mean, I think that was a revelation for everybody during the training where people started just coming and sharing, I think we need more stakeholders to be involved in this process. So I mean, that has definitely been one of the learnings. And also, also if you want to share in terms of challenges, in terms of, I think you did share that there is acceptance and failure stories, but anything else that you feel people here can take away from your experience, that will be useful. But I'd also request anybody who has questions from Shruti, we can always take it at this point.
Yeah. So in terms of challenges, I think there's still a couple of things that we are also navigating, which is how do we really collect stories from the field? How do we consistently do it? It's a whole culture shift, right? So all of that is still work in progress. It's not really a challenge. I think it's stuff that because we haven't gotten there. It just seems like there's still a lot of work to be done. One of the other, I think, things that we really need to be aware of is all of this is really going to come out of non-donor time in some way, right? Because these are all going to go back to programmatic developments. It's going to go back to learnings, etc. And it's very easy to deprioritize it. So just having the resources in the organization who can take it up. But I also realize it is so critical because the more we do this and the more it becomes a part of the org DNA, I feel like later it just gives a lot more.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Shruti. I think a couple of things that I just want to highlight based on what Shruti shared was this whole shift, and that for us also has been the power of storytelling, which is, it's sure the power is in communication. Stories can really communicate to share it to donor reports or other stakeholders, to the communities themselves, but also how can stories become more like a learning tool and like a way for taking in insights, for learning from them. Can we learn something which is not in that whole other data, which is always highlighted lens? So, I mean, that is something I just wanted to stress a little on.
I think that's what we were talking about, like the seen and the unseen, right? Like the seen will always come from our data, but the unseen will only come from the stories.
Correct.
And then
Very
to make
well
that seen through data later.
Super. Thanks. I think very, very well put. Okay, there is a question. I suppose any particular points or strategies to be followed while writing a story, like impactful stories, and can create actually an efficient impact. I think we would be sharing that a little actually right after this part, and I think those practices have something we've also followed with FMCH of being able to write a story, or what are the ways to capture impactful stories and learning stories in a way. How do you train your field team members, and then how do they capture these stories? Which tools to be used? I think there's these. A
lot of technical questions on how to do this.
Yes, this is what will be shared now. All right, super. I think thank you so much, Shruti, for taking on this time and sharing your experience. We'd be, I think Shruti might be here for a couple of minutes. A few more minutes. If you all have questions, you can share them in the chat. And Shruti, it'll be really nice if you can take a few of those. I'll just, again, keeping the time in mind, I'll continue to the next part of the presentation. Just going to share screen. Super. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thanks. So I think a couple of questions which came also, just going to use those to be able to talk about the next part, which is process of using stories in programs, and breaking those down into, we'll be breaking those down into 3 sections. One is the capturing of stories, and the question which also was put in chat was something would be partially covered in this section. Sharing the stories, and then sense making and learning from those stories. So the first part, which is capturing of stories, I think as Shruti also covered a part of it, I'm just going to stress a little more on this, which is around breaking the hesitation. There is around storytelling, if you even ask me or anybody, it's not about a field team member or any person. If you just say that, hey, you have to write a story, or this is like a task, it becomes daunting in a way, and it becomes too much to think about. How do I go about it? How am I going to write something around this? But if you notice the structure of the story that Akshay also read out, there were sections, there were parts of it was like, what is the background, what are the issues, what is the current situation? And I think one of the things that we've learned is that getting started needs some kind of push and some kind of help in a way to write stories, and our learning has been to be able to templatize some of these things for people to easily share, for people to easily section it out and share what was the background of the story. So I think Anita also mentioned how do you really talk about context, and if there's like a section for it, it becomes more and more relatable. The second hesitation, which was again Shruti mentioned briefly, which was something that there is so much pressure to write about impact, and because of the way people have looked at stories, that we forget that stories are beyond just impact stories. Also, stories are about capturing failures, and that becomes one of the biggest shifts for people. And when we say failures, honestly, that's a word which becomes in itself very intimidating and daunting, that how can I talk about failures? What will people think about me if I've not done something right? It becomes really personal. And the idea is to shift that lens and to say that it's not just about failures, it's about areas of improvement. And how can we learn from those? So that has become one of the key things for us to focus on, and one of the learnings that we've had over the training experiences. And this one is pretty interesting. And these are few, we can't possibly share all, but really those few things that we feel have come in. And one of those is that while we were doing these trainings, we were coming up with a story, which is like, hey, this is a template, there is a structure, and this is an ideal story, which is contextualized. We'll learn from them, we'll write an ideal story and be like, hey, can you also attempt writing something like this? And that itself became such a big, it was a hindrance in the process of anybody to write a story, because it was an ideal story, or it was somebody else's ideal story. The idea and the realization that we had was that how do we help anybody write a good story themselves, and that becomes their standard, rather than saying that it's another person's standard. Oh, why don't you look at somebody else's story? Can I myself be able to write a good story is something which is the task for training. And how can you make sure that that person learns to do that? So after that, there is no kind of I'm not intimidated by anything of that kind. It just becomes like, hey, I've done this before and I know I've done it well, so let me just write it again. So that's one of the hesitations that we felt was there in the first during the trainings that we do around telling stories. The other aspect has been, while there is a template, and this was more from the part that we were on in the initial trainings, when we were actually coming up with this system, while we were also designing the tool Stories from the Ground, which is something we'll park it later. But we had this realization, because we also come from a design research background, that every person and every field team member, every community member has those stories with them. And when you're talking to them, they just come like that. And all you have to do is simply ask, or fir. Okay, or fir, ya fir par kyun, or kaise, and people will share. People will openly share by just saying that, hey, somebody is listening and asking me, or fir, or par kaise and kyun. And that's where we realized that there is a need for contextual triggers and those nudges to be able to facilitate sharing a story. And those are some learnings that we've also incorporated in the tools and in the trainings that we do. And I think one of the things that is definitely important for anybody to be able to write a good story. And I think somebody had asked a question around that as well. So yeah, I mean, that is one of the learnings for us. And again, a point mentioned by Shruti was the third aspect of collecting stories, was building culture. And that really happens from making sure that there is time allocated for building that habit to tell a story, whichever form, whichever medium, but that habit needs to be developed. While the first step is like, hey, can I write a good story? I think I wrote a good story. I can probably write another story. And how do you really continue doing that for them to be like, okay, this is a part of it, and this is something I really want to continue doing. And being okay with, as again Shruti mentioned, being okay with creating a safe space, and being okay with being vulnerable, because it becomes too much of a pressure that I cannot share, I can share, maybe I can't. And can I make it more like a learning experience for like, hey, I'm sharing for my peer to learn from, and or I'm sharing so the program team can also make sure that there is learning and changes of a program can be included in that. So having that culture to be able to share the feelings is really important. The last is also, when you talk about culture, that's also rituals around writing the story and learning from each other, which essentially means, like, what if it's just like every Friday, 1 hour, I'm just going to, if everybody in the organization is going to write or is going to share stories, because that's where learning happens. So how can I make sure there are rituals around having that culture to share stories? I just want to confirm if our next guest, Sundar, has joined. Yes. So I'll just very quickly introduce Sundar Rajan, who is the executive director at INREM Foundation. INREM Foundation is a research institution working in the space of water, public health, agriculture, environment, especially on the focus of water. And we've been working with them pre-Ooloi, where we existed. And I think Sundar and the team at INREM has been more of like an anchor for all of us to start, or like the push for all of us to start working in this direction. And Sundar, I know that it was hard for you to join today, but thank you so much for taking this time out to share, to be here. Just wanted to start this interaction with just, if you can share, how did you come to this point of using stories in the work you do? Even share a little about your context of using stories.
Sure, Yashna. Thanks a lot for inviting me here and also this session. Each time you guys do it, there's so much to learn. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I was just seeing that photograph and then remembering, it was, I think, maybe around 4 or 5 years back, because like 2017 or so, we had a team meet. I don't remember when it was. All pre-COVID memories now.
Like pre-COVID and COVID and post-COVID.
So let's say a long time back, we had a team meet, and we were talking about some of our programs. Anyway, a bit about our what we do. We work on water and health issues in our organization, and a broad range of issues connecting water and health. Anyway, when we sat down to talk about many of the field experiences, we saw that I'm just hearing Yashna today, and also Shruti. What we realize is that each person has so much to share. Especially people who are facing the ground reality every day, right? When you're working on certain issues, and if you're dealing with it every day, when we are, let's say, your organization that works on water, and you are going to villages, that's part of your job. You are actually walking around and, facing challenges, meeting people, trying to achieve, what you have set out as goals in an organization. But then also, when you go and meet people, there are so many things that you hear from them and learn. But when in projects and programs, there are very few avenues where you can actually share what you see every day. And what you see and observe every day is actually very rich. In projects and programs, I mean, if I were to know what is the political economy of of a gram panchayat plan, where water and health issues come in. I mean, since none of our programs deal with it, the people who are actually going to our villages don't talk about it.
Yeah.
But then when you meet a person in front and you start talking, everything comes out. अरे वो इलेक्शन हुआ था और इलेक्शन के पहले उनको वाटर सप्लाई का प्रोग्राम करना था, and then so on and so forth and so on and so forth. Then the whole story emerges of, acha, actually this is what happened. Then you start thinking, acha, this is what actually happened. And so what I mean to say is that when we actually met people and realized that so much rich experiences that people are facing in front, it all is going where, who's, I mean, and so what do you do with it, right? I mean, but when you actually listen to it, then you see, okay, this is what is a reality. When you look further, okay, this is what is really happening. Sometimes you're actually overachieving in what you're doing, and you don't even know about it. Because there are so many things that are happening. But anyway, coming back, when we heard about it, few of our people, we realized are such natural storytellers. I mean, Akshay and Yashna, people like Sachin, very well.
Yeah.
And then Kalpana. I mean, these are natural storytellers. And when they start speaking, then they, I mean, you get such rich experience with them. But many times language is a big barrier.
Correct.
English is a big barrier. In our country, English becomes a big barrier, but also Hindi becomes a barrier, and so on. Right? Each of our major languages are barriers, to others, right?
Yeah.
So if you're a Kannada speaking person and there is a whole Hindi speaking group, then it becomes a barrier, to share. So that is one level of barriers, but also hierarchy within organizations becomes a barrier. Whatever we may accept, within ourselves, it all becomes barriers for reality to actually, or perceived reality, to actually come out. Each person is actually looking at things from their own, perspective. But anyway, when we realized all this, I mean, we realized that there is a lot which is in people's minds. So it's not about project goals, not about, us getting someone at the top getting rich information so that you have a strategic communication program. No. It is just for the person who is actually really doing things to let it out, letting the steam out. I mean, just letting come out. It's very empowering for the person who is actually working on these issues every day to have some avenue saying that, okay, all this can come out somewhere. This is also of value, to others, and we realize it is empowering to the person, to begin with. So that's where we started when we came across, pre-Ooloi, the same team pre-Ooloi, all of you people, and we felt that storytelling by people who are on the field is a tremendous empowerment opportunity. And why don't we get going, on this? And that was around 2018, I would say 2019. When we started thinking about it. And some of the people are natural storytellers. Some of the people just require a bit of nudge. And there are others who, bachpan mein to sabhi log storytellers the. Every person is a storyteller at some point of time, right? So that way we can say that, there is a storyteller inside each person waiting to, come out. So gradually, you actually realize that, each person's perception of the reality, there is an opportunity that needs to come out. But as you were sharing now, for some people, a blank slate is what they desire. Some people who just don't want anything, they just want to come blank and they start talking. But there are many others, who are hesitant because of maybe structures where they are part of. Ki ghar mein, ki organization mein, there has never been a culture, where you actually can express. So then, there are others whom require simple templates. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, So then, what you have can come out more freely and, in a less hesitant, manner. So there are different types of persona probably, within any group. And it also depends on the hierarchy of organizations, culture, and all of that. But gradually what we saw, over 2019, 2020 is that, as I mentioned, language is a big factor. When you open up, and that's why probably technology is also a big factor, because if technology is limiting and language is limiting, then it becomes very difficult for people to be empowered by sharing their experiences. But as you open it up, if you make it simple and if you open up language sharing capabilities, then that is a big step, friend. But a big impediment definitely is the culture, the hierarchy, culture of hierarchy. If people are penalized to talk about real experiences, then I think that's the end of the whole thing. Right? You are only going to nudge people towards impact stories of a certain kind. So that's definitely something, which is a constant thing. And it's not just people on the top or somewhere, but it's all throughout, within any hierarchy structure. So as we went along, like over the years, we started people, then it builds up, right? There is a critical mass and people see each other and people keep sharing. You need appreciation just for sharing. And when it builds up, then stories by themselves take on they become a different kind of a value. So what we find today, we have maybe couple of 100 stories of different kinds coming out from the ground, experiences of people. They also become learning content, not just for you within an organization, but also for the external world. So of late, last year and a half, we have been having courses within which we have been able to embed these stories, and these are courses of different kinds, courses for practitioners, for students. But also increasingly now we find that yes, to begin with, we did not find value in stories actually getting to reporting to philanthropies and donors, but now increasingly we are seeing a lot of space where classic learning, monitoring, evaluation frameworks, we are able to utilize stories and stories in a broad way, to actually embed them to a coming. But it's taken time. But I also feel now that we have a lot to work on our culture and to work on individuals to open up. But I know that for example, our Karnataka team has a culture of sitting down once a month. It's not once a week, but once a month, and trying to work on a month story. Even it has gotten to the extent now it's become a problem. In fact, to admit to you, Akshay, जब लोगों को डेटा पूछते हैं तो स्टोरी देते हैं. Anyway, it's good because our monthly reports now. If you look at our monthly reports now, is it what is your learning of a month, like one story. So like so many things which are hidden here and there. Now people are now getting into that culture, which is good. I mean, in a good way that there's a good culture of people sharing and putting things across. So there's a lot of rich material now available. One is about a platform and things available outside, but also when in an internal kind of reporting and stuff, people now see the value that you put down experiences, and not just that 1, 2, 3, 4 narrative. So I'll pause here.
Yeah, thank you so much for Sundar to share all that information of how you and INREM Foundation took storytelling as an approach. And thank you for also including Ooloi in that journey, to be honest, because as you're saying, we've also seen all these stories coming up on the platform that we're using, which is the Water Quality Network, and also becoming more useful for people to learn from. I'm also just going to screen share, and very quickly, it's a 40-second video of one of the field team members at INREM Foundation sharing their experience of writing stories on the platform.
और एक्सपीरियंस
the voice.
अच्छा रहा था कि किस तरह से एक जो बच्चा जिसके पैर टेढ़े थे और एक अजीब, पहली बार हमारे जितने भी केस थे उसमें भी एक ये केस अलग ही टाइप का था, तो उसको लेकर हमने लिखा, किस तरह उसके साथ काम किया, उसके माता पिता को कन्विंस किया, और फ्लोराइड पानी है, गुड न्यूट्रिशन है, जो कैल्शियम मैग्नीशियम विटामिन सी प्रोटीन, और फिर जो समय समय पे हम काउंसलिंग करते थे, वो सारा चीजें उसमें आया. और लास्ट में चेंज क्या हुआ लास्ट 2 साल में, वो एक कंक्लूजन के रूप में लिखा था हमने. और
Yeah, so this is also the network, waterquality.network, where all these stories by not just Indian Foundation, but all the other network partners are documenting. I think we can, Akshay has shared the link on chat. You all can have a look at it later. So thank you once again, Sundar, for this time. If anybody has any questions from Sundar, please put it on chat. We are slightly tight on time, so I'll move forward. But yes, I'll just go to the next part of what was the process of sharing stories, which is one was capturing, the second was the sharing aspect of stories. One is this whole point what Sundar made was donor communication. What Shruti also spoke about, curating stories for the purpose of stakeholder communication, different stakeholders, different purposes, and curation can be done through that. The tool that I'm again and again mentioning also is a screenshot of what we've kept here, which is, say, if there are stories coming around a program, and that is a tool to also facilitate capturing of stories, but also sharing these stories, that different programs, how can all these stories come together in one place to be able to give open access to different stakeholders, or for them to access, or for, say, use these stories for professional documentation. And there's a lot of learning from the program level that can happen, and that can then go for documentation for, again, the purpose of communication. The second is what Sundar really stressed on, which is on using this as a learning tool, as a tool for documenting case studies, for making sure there's peer learning, there's partner learning that can happen through these stories. And they can work as either training material or part of a training program you all are doing. Those stories become that reference point or a part of the toolkit. So real examples, real people, peer learning is a great form of learning and motivation, because it just becomes more relatable. And the other way to do this is like case studies, or like when you're sharing stories, it can be regular updates that go to team members. So sharing highlights of what has happened. As Sundar said, that there's like a monthly dedicated time given to the Karnataka team for like sharing, and they keep updating. How do you share highlights? How do you share learnings? How do you share experiences with the team? So in a way, how do you, the idea is to use this as material to learn for peer learning, for case studies, for training material. That's one of the ways of using stories. But the other is also, which is one of the things that we also stress on, is how do you sense make and how do you learn at a programmatic level, which is how do you use stories as qualitative data, which means learning, as I said, at a programmatic level. How do you take insights from there? Because most of these stories, even the stories that that Akshay read about FMCH, there were so many details and insights hidden in the stories. There were some which were all, learning about the fact that there is past, you need to go into the past to understand what's the baggage that people are bringing with respect to malnutrition, or being patient. But there are many insights with respect to, say, for example, in the case of FMCH, which can talk about gender, which can talk about stereotypes, biases, and is there any relation to do with gender and malnutrition, for example, right? So there are insights hidden in stories, and the idea is to identify these insights and patterns across different stories, and also to put them together to improve and iterate in a program faster, because it can be one that we all design. The programs are designed, they are defined, there are indicators which are set, and while the program is happening, you probably realize only after a year that, hey, there were some learnings that could have been implemented faster. But as stories keep documenting and being made visible for different stakeholders, there's that learning that can keep happening faster in programs. And that is that is something which is really, really valuable for any program to grow. I'm just going to share this. So this is a video of using stories from the ground, the tool that we are talking about, how some of the things that we've spoken about are getting captured in this video. Just gonna. So what we spoke about is that there are different formats of stories. There can be a written story, a photo story, a video story, even stories via WhatsApp integration, chatbot onto a platform that can be done. So in different formats, different stories can be inputted. And as I said, there can be templates that can be set, which can be very contextual to what is a need of an organization. And this is an example of how Indian Foundation is using this template on the platform. And how basically how do you want to discover stories can also go in the thematic or settings of a story. This is an example, if I can just pause here, of the hints which we use, and we add triggers even in each section. So again, bringing back what Sundar shared, that there's one is a plain white page which you can just keep writing on. The other is giving them a template, and the third is within the template, how do you give those nudges and those triggers for people to think about. And we've just integrated those learnings in the tool that we're working towards creating, which is something somebody from the team can link it up in the chat. And what can you do after that? So if you can write a story, you could also tag those stories with learnings that come along the way. So if it's not, say, a thematic which you're already working towards, but it is a new theme that you've discovered, all of that can eventually come together in a analysis dashboard, say which is present on the platform, where you can study what are the different tags which have come in, and what are different people talking about those tags, right? So how can all that learning also be present in a form of in a form where you can learn from all the stories together. I'll just a second. I will have to pause my screen share. Second. Oops. Yeah, I'll just open it out for people for a short question and answer session. We have a couple of more things to share, but I think we can just pause a little here for a few minutes. We're all here to answer your questions. I'd also request Akshay, Suchi, Sachita to please feel free to answer questions. If there are some questions which have already come in chat, maybe we can also answer those first. And to Vaishali and somebody from, I'm assuming, ECF, there were questions. I hope those got answered through the session. Okay. All right. Okay, maybe what we can do is also share the second part of what we have to offer, and then quickly take the rest. In case you all want to share any questions you have, we can always read it out from the chat. Yeah, so just to share in terms of also what we are doing with organizations, One part of it got covered in terms of the training, and what we can offer is more like training around upskilling and building cultures around storytelling. This includes training around skills as well as culture as separate pieces. Two different organizations, and we're also doing this more in a cohort way, which is, say, a few organizations come together for that training. It could always be contextual for different organizations, but again, in a cohort manner. And the second is using the stories from the ground product and implementing that as a tool for organizations to use, which includes assessing needs of particular organizations, product implementation, and continued support. So this is like a digital tool. We do this implementation at the beginning, understand what are the templates that need to be added to a particular organization. How do they want to capture information? What are these different formats? As I said, there's a lot of formats that can be explored. The basic setup, training of a few core team members, and populating these stories. But how the idea is to also continue that support for the year to make sure everything is stable for an organization to use. And these are two things that we have to offer different organizations, and we have actually prepared a form for expression of interest. If again, we can just add that to the chat. If you would be interested, please add share your interest in the chat, in the form, and what would be the program you're interested in, if at all. But very quickly, I'll just also share something. If you're also right now new to be able to this approach, and you're just thinking and getting started, we just have a canvas for you all. We'll be sharing, I don't know if it's possible, but maybe this recording can be shared later. You could just quickly take a screenshot of this canvas, which is more for you to get started, and just say that if you wanted to use stories and as an approach in a program, just to get started in terms of what is this program, if you can describe that better, what is the purpose of collecting stories, what would the stories be about, so what are the different topics you want to cover. A couple of you did speak about different topics, and that could be a point, right? I think somebody spoke about the part about not people and trees, for example, or different aspects of climate. So these are the topics you want to talk about. The different contributors and stakeholders, so who would be writing these stories, and who would be reading these stories. So that also becomes the starting point for people to just start thinking about, if there was say a way to use stories in a program, what are you looking at? And I hope this canvas is something you can also start filling right now, and ask questions if you have any. We have some time to really answer those questions, but if not, you can always keep this as a tool that you want to get started later. But yeah, just going to stop screen share. I suppose Sahana has shared the screenshot in the chat, so just going to stop here. Any thoughts, questions, feelings, please. This is an Akshay trait which I just pulled, which is thoughts, questions, feelings. If you have any, please share those. You can unmute, talk about it. We're very, very happy to answer questions or even hear your thoughts and feedback.
So Yashna, just to recap, so what Ooloi is offering is a tool and training that helps organizations capture stories from the field, and build that muscle within the organization to as a collective capacity to tell better stories. Would that be a fair kind of a summary?
That's right. That's right. So we do, I mean, there are two parts of it. We do training for organizations, but that could be it, because people maybe just want to get started with things and they just want to, maybe it's at that point that you want to just train people to, hey, there are stories you can share at that point, or it could be taken ahead one step also. So after training, how do you really make it into a practice where that tool is also getting included in this whole process of an organizational behavior? Yeah.
Also, do you cover different mediums and different methods? Because I realize that stories are not just in the form of written media. Do you
Sure.
also cover different sorts of media?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, if you could speak a little bit more about that.
So yes, I think I think written one is of course that came across. There's also, as I said, there are formats. There can be formats like documenting photo stories, and it's some people want to share and share through pictures, because a lot of documentation can be done. Especially, I think one of the participants had mentioned about climate and such, and there's like visual storytelling that can be done. That is also something that is something we train for. About video stories, there are also some principles that we follow, which can then be documented on and captured along the way. There is also, these becomes like different formats of storytelling, but in terms of capturing, but also formats of capturing, making it easy. And I said, as I shared, that there is a WhatsApp chatbot. People are so comfortable talking to talking on WhatsApp, that how do you go where people are, right? And not making it like a big activity that, hey, I have to think and go on the platform. So those are some integrations that we've done for easy documentation also, which is like, how do you write, or I mean, how does the chatbot interface really capture the stories while asking a few questions, and you're answering those, and those get populated on the platform also.
I
Yeah.
think one thing I'll just add, Ganesh, is that like especially with the training and sort of building that culture and rituals in an organization, right? That is platform and format agnostic, right? I think the idea there is, how do you build that foundational skill and confidence, So I mean, if I can relate a early experience that we had with the INREM team, part of that process at that time, the space for sharing stories was the WhatsApp group of the organization, right, of the project. And because we were working closely with the team, we were allowed to lurk on those WhatsApp groups and, lurk and observe. And maybe somebody might call that digital ethnography, but we're basically lurking. And I think one thing we realized was that people were just sharing photos, 2 photos and no explanation, things like that. This happened today. And I think some of the research process we then did, part of our design team did some testing and some study with some of the INREM folks. And while it took a while for that to come to the platform in the form of photo stories, etc., just that conversation in a way acted as a way to trigger ways in which people started sharing more context when they shared photos. Photos were not simply showing, people with a filter or a plant or something like that. It's also the process of them doing something about it, things like that. So it's also, when you have these sorts of interventions, they have far-reaching consequences, in just the way people interact with each other, what they think is important, and your ability to step back and observe your own experience and actions, right? That also, those subtle changes start kind of filtering through.
Thanks. That's quite helpful. Yeah. Any other questions? You can also make use of the chat as well.
Yes, Garima.
Yeah, hi, Ashna, and it's been a nice session. My question is from, it's connected to what a lady earlier commented upon, which was about the, the issue or the challenge of, communicating stories which relate to animals and trees. So in the registration time also, when we were asked for what we would like to learn or know in this session, one of my questions perhaps was how, because I work with an organization which is into science and technology. So we are, very keen to communicate science and technology effectively to people. Now connecting with what was earlier said about the difficulty with building a connect to something as a tree, which is that part is also there for science and technology. So whatever is not anthropogenic in nature, is difficult to communicate in terms of the effect we want to have through stories. So if we want an emotional, connection, to come in from readers, or if we want something which stays with them, but it is not connected to, people, then it doesn't register so strongly. And so if something which is being done in the area of science and technology, but is not likely to impact people directly soon, right, but is still important. So building stories around that, to have the kind of impact stories are meant to have, and we very well know they have, has been challenging. So from that viewpoint, I wanted to know how we can approach that. That remains a challenge.
Maybe I can take first stab at this question. I think first up, I'll just say that a lot of our focus in this session was around unlocking stories from the ground in social impact programs and organizations. Having said that, part of the other work that we do is around designing learning experiences, right? Especially a lot of our work has been with Quest Alliance, which works in the education space. And some of that, is actually quite focused on STEM education and, careers in STEM and things like that. So, the way I'm interpreting this is, how do you look at stories as a tool for communication, as a tool for communicating extremely complex ideas. And I can call back to a few other experiences, and I think the regularly what we have come to, right, is the need to build narratives using metaphor and analogies. And I don't think that's necessarily a revolutionary idea in the science communication space, but consistently, when we have been designing learning experiences, whether that is a game experience we designed, or a chat bot, or just digital learning material, when we've had to explain any complex idea, right, we very often refer to analogies or analogous human experiences, and that usually helps to get people, if you use an analogy or a metaphor, that gets people into the appropriate emotional state or space that you want them to be, and then you deliver that concept, it's going to be quite effective, or a quite lot more effective than trying to kind of personify something that is not a human. So that's just a thought there. So I think maybe we're looking at storytelling as a fairly large umbrella. I think the focus in the session was in one part of that, and I think what you're talking about is another part. We have some experience on that, so I'm relating from that. But yeah, Yashna, anything to add? Or
no, I mean, yeah, I think as Akshay shared, there's some of the work that we're also doing on looking at climate narratives, right? And how can we make that relatable for people to understand? Is been on. I mean, we've gone through that struggle of really saying that showing a tree or showing a particular climate change just like that might not relate. But if you flip the narrative to say that how do we make it so human, how can then people not ignore, right? How can that be then people how can they ignore is what I meant. Is that something that's something been the approach also, as Akshay said, using parallels, but at the same time flipping some approaches of narrativizing any of these concepts. I think we can also, I feel there's a lot to share. I think maybe you can also share some examples a little later with you. I mean, as a separate session, Garima and Anita, to share our experience of how you've used a couple of different methodologies to share stories around different topics which are non human.
Yeah, Ashna, thanks. And thanks, Akshay, also. So, the thing is that in an earlier organization, we did a lot of field work. And so, I mean, I don't want to sound, it's not that I'm comparing, but yes, getting stories from the field where you had a lot of human emotions coming in and, putting them together to form a narrative which is impactful in terms of actually showcasing the impact was in a way easier than it is to do with something where you don't have a human, at the center right now. Okay, where you can't find a human to tell a story, right? So yeah, I know what you're trying to tell is to like, and I agree with what Akshay said, to use, perhaps equivalent stuff, maybe metaphors or something that is appropriate and kind of brings that experience or brings the readers closest to that experience of a real person. So I mean that does work, but so this is for impact. But if you want to educate also, so like you are saying, maybe some more examples of the ways this can be done will be helpful. Yeah. But yeah, for now, like that flipping part and also the metaphor part, both are like they are kind of answers partly to my question. Thank you.
Super. Thanks, Garima, for asking that question. There's another question by Anjan. How do you suggest we should measure the impact of stories or the tangible investments required in generating them? Can you share any metrics or targets that organizations that work with set to measure success? Anjan, do you want to talk a little more about this question? Where is this coming from? What is the kind of metric which you've had in mind while asking this? Because we have an answer, but it won't be a specific one.
No worries. Happy to kind of add some more background. So like increasingly, at least with the nonprofit that I work in and maybe some of the nonprofits that are also on this call, we're seeing a lot of resistance from funders to kind of, spend money on generating stories like this. You would have the option where maybe once a year or once in two years that the funder would send their own video team to kind of capture stories from the ground and then use it for their own audience or for their own media social handles. Increasingly, we're facing a lot of resistance in justifying the return on the money or the use of doing these things more and more. That they want monies to go towards programs, towards operations, stuff like that. So I was curious to know, like, because you work with a lot of nonprofits, and it seems like they keep trying to come back to you and ask you to do more and more. So what are some of the things that they feel good about or that works for them, and how do they measure that specifically that kind of justifies the expense that goes into generating all this all these stories, content, media, whatever you want to call it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Akshay, you want to take this?
Anjan, I think that's a very useful insight for us also. I think so far some of the organizations that we have been working with have almost been self-selecting, in some sense, right? Like, because Shruti has realized the importance of this for their program as they are at that stage of scaling up, that this is something extremely important and they need to carve out the funding for it and things like that, and the time for it. And now we've done a small exercise with them, and the scope of what is required is starting to become real. Similarly, say for an INREM foundation, the stories piece fits into a larger kind of program around the water quality network, becoming part of, say, an input into monitoring and evaluation, that's where it had started for a program that they were doing, where a network kind of action was one of the important sort of outcomes of that program. In other cases, say there's a space where an organization is using it to train school leaders on storytelling. The stories from the ground becomes an input into that you're learning something, and then you use it as a space to kind of add those stories as well. So these are a few of the ways that organizations have been dealing with it. But I think the perspective you're bringing right now is extremely useful for us also to understand. I think we're increasingly getting into these spaces where we're working closely with partners to navigate that, to understand that. And I think what we are finding, and I'd love to hear from others in the in the room around their experience around this, because I think we're realizing that it takes a certain combination of organizations who are making a program happen, whether that is say a lead organization doing the implementation, a donor or a set of donors who are supporting that, or partner organizations who actually see the need to do adaptive programming, or have processes that can take in data, whether that is quantitative or qualitative, and iterate as the program is being implemented. And sometimes that might mean not having extremely rigid log frames, and having that flexibility. Maybe there is some clue there, but I'd love to kind of hear more about this from you also, Anjan, and from others, because I think this is we can't say we have an answer to this. I think we're also learning. The learning session is not culmination culmination of all our knowledge, etc. It's we're also in process. And I think so I think this is useful insight for us. But I'd love for others to kind of jump in.
Yeah, I'll give a quick input as from the other side of the table. Sure. I think there is growing conversation around the importance of storytelling, importance of community engagement. I think as funders, we also have the responsibility of talking about this and enabling this for the communities that we support. So I think organizations like ET Chandra is doing capacity building, but storytelling is one of them. We are trying to learn how can we support the organizations through learning sessions like this or through storytelling grants. So it is nascent. I'd agree that we're still in the stage where it's not looked at as critical as operations or admin and other program costs. But I think initiatives such as this and hearing from Shruti and Sundar, we can see that there is value in this. So hopefully we're going in the direction of good change. Yeah.
Super. Thanks for sharing that, Sahana. I think we're on time. I mean, it is 4:29. We wouldn't want to extend the session beyond the allocated time, but in case there is something that we've missed, please write to us. We can always share your feedback. We can just link out our email addresses as well in chat for anybody to write or share your input. And in case you all feel there's value in what we are doing to support your organizations, we'd love to hear that as well. And we'd love to want to support in that journey. Let me just share the email IDs, but I'm sure we can always, with the recording, maybe those things can also be shared. Just a second. Thank you so much for everybody for joining and for listening through this session. I think there was a lot for us also to learn from the comments and from the questions that you made. So thank you once again for taking this time out. I think Ganesh, if you can just maybe if there's anything that you want to share. Garima, yes.
Just wanted to know if there will be a recording of this available, because some of our colleagues were interested, but because it's budget today, we got into covering all of that, and they were not able to join this.
Yeah,
a recording of that will be shared very soon, and
thank you.
This will be up on YouTube, so you can all access it over there as well. Thanks a lot for joining. Thanks, Yashna. Thanks, Akshay, and others at the Ooloi Labs team for moderating this. Thanks to the individuals who also came, Sundar and Shruti. So look forward to the inputs and the different things, messages that will come across. And the people at Ooloi have shared their email addresses as well. For any further queries, you can definitely get in touch with them. I'm sure they'll be happy to oblige. Thanks a lot for joining in. I look forward to seeing you all in the next session as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.